time.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Underestimated Podcast. It is your host, Jeremy, back with another episode, another little late night podcast. I really like doing this, but I know I'm not gonna be able to do this for a long time after tonight. So, let's find out how it lasted. But as y'all can tell, and thumbnail title, we are gonna bash the New York Mets today. Woo! It actually comes on a funny day because we're currently in the middle of a Subway Series between the Mets and the Yankees, and the Mets actually won today. But I think the Yankees won the series 2-1, so it's whatever. And I always enjoy having the opportunity to bash a rival organization, especially when it's in a non-biased way. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, the New York Mets were supposed to be becoming like baseball's next super team, sort of, after committing historic money, assembling star power across the roster, and pushing all in to compete for a championship. Expectations around the organization exploded, and but instead of dominance, the Mets have found themselves surrounded by inconsistency, criticism, pressure, and growing questions about whether this roster construction actually works. And I think what makes this conversation so interesting, at least to me, is the fact that the problem isn't that the Mets are untalented. They have the talent. The roster it's really good on paper. This is one of the most talented teams in baseball on paper. And the issue is that baseball games are not won on paper. And over the course of the season, the Mets have repeatedly looked like a team struggling to justify the expectations attached to them. And from roster construction problems to questionable pitching depth to defensive inconsistencies to offensive cold streaks, in huge moments specifically, there's a growing argument that this franchise built a roster that is designed more so for headlines than production. And when a team spins at the level the Mets spent, every flaw becomes magnified under a microscope. The first place to start is with Juan Soto, because his arrival completely changed the expectations around the franchise. Soto was one of the greatest hitters of this generation, and his plate discipline is elite, his power is elite, his ability to control an at-bat is elite, and when healthy and locked in, he changed the entire dynamic of an offense. I mean, I'm a Yankees fan, so I got to experience 1 year of Soto, and I'm not happy that he's gone, especially that he went to the crosstown rival. But I get it, this Juan Soto, he deserves his bread, and he also had mentioned something about there being some sort of disconnect with the team during the World Series or something like that, or maybe shortly after. That also may have led to him leaving. Anyway, whatever. Good riddance. We're good without him. But no, like when that sort of pressure comes, unlike almost anything else in sports, when a player signs a massive contract in New York, especially with the Mets, every at-bat becomes a national discussion. And every slump becomes a headline. Every strikeout becomes content for sports talk shows like this podcast, and social media debates. The Mets did not acquire Soto just to be good. They acquired him to help deliver a championship. or multiple championships. And while Soto has still produced offensively, there have been stretches where fans expect him to completely carry the franchise, which simply isn't realistic in baseball. One player cannot solve structural roster flaws. One superstar cannot compensate for inconsistent pitching, depth, or defensive breakdowns. Yet, because of the money involved and because of the spotlight surrounding New York baseball, Soto instantly became the symbol of the organization's expectations. Fair or unfair, when the Mets struggle, Soto became or has become part of the conversation immediately. Then there's his all-star counterpart, Francisco Lindor, who may honestly represent the emotional identity of this roster more than anybody else. Lindor has been one of the best shortstops in baseball for years, and statistically, his overall production usually remains strong by the end of the season. But the frustration among parts of the franchise and the fan base comes from timing and consistency. There are stretches where Lindor was like a true MVP level candidate, carrying the offense for basically weeks at a time. And then there are stretches where the bat kind of cools off dramatically and the criticism just floods in immediately. And in New York, consistency matters more than almost anything. They want greatness constantly, and because Lindor is one of the best guys in terms of leading his team, every losing streak somehow circles back to him. Defensively, he remains elite and incredibly valuable, but offensively, people expect him to be the superstar centerpiece every single night. That pressure can become overwhelming for any player, regardless of how great and talented that you may be, especially in a market where the fan base is constantly reacting emotionally at every series. And then you sort of look at the supporting cast, right? Which on paper looks and sounds incredible. Bichette brings offensive firepower and bat-to-ball ability. Marcus Semien provides veteran leadership, power, durability, and playoff experience. The lineup just sounds like an all-star team when you read the names out loud, but baseball chemistry is more complicated than stacking star players together. A balanced roster requires timing, fit, defense, situational hitting, depth, and durability over 162 games. And it's really, when you talk about with the playoffs added onto it, close to 180 games. And so there have been moments where the Mets offense looks unstoppable for an entire week. And then, it's like they're crushing opponents' pitching and overwhelming teams with patience and power. But then there are moments where the lineup completely disappears in high-pressure situations, especially with runners in scoring position. And that inconsistency becomes even more frustrating because expectations are so high. Fans don't tolerate cold streaks when super teams are going through them the same way they would tolerate them from a rebuilding club. Every offensive drought feels like a disaster, but because of how much talent exists on the roster, that's why it matters more. And, I can attest to this. I can vouch for this absolutely because I'm a Warriors fan, right? So there was a point in time where we had a top 5, top 10 player in our starting lineup at every position. We had Steph Curry, who at the time was the top 10, top 5 point guard in the NBA. Klay Thompson, top 10 in his position. Kevin Durant, top 10 in his position. Draymond Green, say what you want. Top 10 in his position. And then center was DeMarcus Cousins. And, we really didn't get to see that team do much because they were definitely derailed by injuries. But that team just didn't really gel. And so you can stack the deck all you want. If the hand is not playable, then your cards are useless. And the pitching side might honestly be the biggest reason people argue the Mets are a mess. Clay Holmes, former Yankee, Devin Williams, former Yankee, are talented relievers with nasty stuff, capable of dominating hitters in the game, or late in games actually. But Luke Weaver, also a former Yankee, has had stretches where he's looked reliable and valuable. But modern baseball requires more than a few recognizable bullpen names. It requires their ability over 5 months. And you're talking about consistency and leverage situations and rotation stability. The Mets have repeatedly dealt with pitching uncertainty, whether through injury, inconsistency, overworked relievers, or starters struggling to pitch deep into games. And once a bullpen starts carrying too much workload early in the season, everything begins to sort of snowball. Relievers become unavailable more often. Relievers kind of just fall off their groove a little bit. Managers are forced into uncomfortable matchup decisions. One bad inning changes momentum completely. Fans start losing trust in late game situations, and suddenly every close game feels unstable. And you need to have a legit 5-man bullpen in terms of a pitching rotation. And that's why I think the Yankees look good this year, because we have 5 pitchers. When you talk about Max Fried, Carlos Rodon, Cam Schlittler, Nestor Cortez, and then I'm gonna add Garrett Cole in there once they bring him back up. That's gonna really help us out, because I can't really say that we've had that the past 2 seasons. We've had a decent pitching rotation, but this is probably the best one that we've accumulated in quite some time. That also puts enormous pressure on the manager, Carlos Mendoza. Managing a superstar heavy roster in New York is one of the hardest jobs in sports, because every decision is criticized instantly. If Mendoza leaves a pitcher in too long, people complain. If he pulls someone too early, people complain. If the lineup construction doesn't work for 3 games, social media starts demanding changes immediately. Managing isn't just about baseball strategy anymore. It's about handling personalities, expectations, media pressure, clubhouse chemistry, and constant public reaction. Mendoza has had moments where his decisions worked beautifully, but he also became an easy target during losing streaks, because managers almost always absorb the blame first. The reality is that even great managers, though, struggle when roster flaws become exposed over a long season. And above all this sits David Stearns, the architect trying to build a sustainable contender while simultaneously satisfying ownership and fans demanding immediate success. Stearns is respected across baseball for his intelligence and roster building philosophy, so to speak, but even smart executives face impossible challenges. when expectations become realistic. I'll take y'all to basketball. Daryl Morey just got fired because of the Sixers' early exit in the playoffs. I mean, I believe they lost by 50 in an elimination game, which is insane. But the thing about that, though, is they weren't even... That wasn't like a 30-point game the entire way that just turned out to be 50 by the end. They were down by 50 in the first quarter. No team should go into halftime in the NBA, honestly, in any sport, and be down 50. You are a professional athlete. Professional team. Yeah, no business being beat by 40. Okay, if it's the worst team in the league. Especially in a playoff elimination game. No, absolutely not. It's not. Anyway. But back to this. The Mets are trying to balance short-term urgency with long-term sustainability, and that's incredibly difficult when fans expect championships immediately after massive spending. Every trade gets analyzed aggressively, every free agent signing gets debated, every prospect decision becomes controversial. If a veteran struggles, people blame the front office. If a young player, succeeds elsewhere, people blame the front office. The pressure in New York just never stops. I think another huge issue surrounding this team is identity. What exactly are the Mets trying to be? Are they a patient offensive powerhouse? Are they a slugging team? Are they built around veteran leadership? Are they prioritizing analytics? Are they focused on long-term development? At times the roster construction feels caught between multiple philosophies. Championship teams usually have a clear identity. Some dominate with elite pitching, some rely on defense and athleticism, some overwhelm teams offensively. But the Mets sometimes feel like a collection of talented names rather than a fully connected baseball machine. And over the course of a marathon like MLB season, cohesion matters more than people realize. There's also the unavoidable reality of New York sports culture. Playing in New York is different from almost any other market in the world. The media coverage is relentless. Sports radio is relentless. Social media is relentless. One bad week can feel like the end of the world. And, these fans expect effort, accountability, and results immediately. And when expectations aren't met, frustration kind of grows fast. And because the Mets operate in the same city as my beloved New York Yankees, comparisons are unavoidable even when the situations are completely different. Mets fans desperately want sustained dominance and legitimacy. They want this franchise to stop feeling chaotic and finally become stable contenders year after year. That emotional frustration adds intensity to every conversation about the team. What makes this even more complicated is that the Mets are not actually a terrible team. That's the fascinating part of it all. They're talented enough to beat anybody. On any given night, this roster can look dominant. Soto can take over a game, and Drury can change momentum defensively and offensively. The bullpen can lock games down. The offense can explode for double-digit runs. I mean, that's why the disappointment feels so dramatic. The gap between expectation and reality is what feels the Mets the Mets are a mess sort of thing that I have portrayed. That narrative that I've sort of put out. And if this were a rebuilding team, nobody would care about inconsistency. But because this is a roster that was designed to contend immediately, every flaw feels catastrophic. There's also a broader baseball conversation here about whether spending guarantees success. If you were to ask me personally, I would say no. Because, I mean, life is a risk, you know? You can spend your bottom dollar on a car that you have always wanted, and it could break down tomorrow. Or in 30 minutes. You know, I mean, that's just how life works. But the Mets, specifically in this instance, are proof that money alone does not automatically create chemistry bound for championships. Like I remember at the Warriors situation. All of those players were basically on max contracts, with the exception of Boogie. I think Boogie was on like a minimum. I think. But that entire team was basically on max contracts. And you know, we did get 2 championships with Katie alone, but we definitely wasn't thinking to take a step back when we got DeMarcus. Like I said, injuries and all that caused them to not even really be on the floor together. But y'all get where I'm heading with this. So baseball is a uniquely unpredictable sort of dynamic to many other sports, and a superstar can feel like you can watch a superstar fail 7 out of 10 times at the plate and still be considered elite. Like, that's what I learned in baseball. If you are batting 300 in baseball, you are considered elite. Even if you're like 200, it's not nothing to lose sleep over. Especially if you're like let's say the 22 to 28, 29 percentile range. You got it, you know? And that's why baseball is just so much different. You're talking about ERA. You got some dudes, best pitchers in the league, got a 3.5 ERA. That's not really that great when you think about it. But you know what you got to be to really be considered great? 1.5 and under, basically. And that's normally for guys who are closers because they don't stay in for more than like 2 to 3 innings. Mostly it's just 1. And so a dominant pitcher can suddenly lose command for a month. Injuries can destroy depth overnight. Hot streaks can completely change narratives along with cold streaks. Building a sustainable winner requires player development, smart roster balance, durability, clubhouse leadership, and timing. But the Mets have some of these elements, but not consistently enough yet. And still, despite all the criticism, this situation is far from hopeless. That's important to acknowledge, of course, because the Mets absolutely have enough talent to turn the narrative around. Baseball seasons are long, you know. Something I had to also learn. Like, a team can start off 7-3, right? Like, you can be 10 games over 500 within the last month or two, even the last 2 weeks of the season, and still very well by the end of the season find yourself out of the playoffs. And that's just sort of the kind of world you live in when you're playing a sport that season is 162 games long. That is extremely hard to sustain seasonal success for the entire season. And you know, I think momentum can change quickly. A strong month can completely reshape public opinion. If the pitching stabilizes, if the lineup becomes more consistent situationally, and if the clubhouse settles into a stronger identity, this team could still become exactly what people expected when the roster was assembled. That's why the Mets remain one of the most fascinating teams in baseball still. They exist somewhere between contender and disappointment at the same time, which is not something you see often in major league sports. Ultimately, the argument of the Mets being a mess, as I have in the title, comes down to one central point. That point being expectations. This franchise created enormous expectations through aggressive spending, superstar acquisitions, and public ambition. when you build a roster this expensive and this talented, fans don't want excuses. They want dominance. They want October success. They want consistency. And until the Mets consistently perform at the level people believe they're capable of, the criticism is just, it's not going to go away. Because you're in New York. You have been the little brother to the New York Yankees for God knows how long. And you got to be tired of that. Because in New York, talent alone is never enough. Potential alone is never enough. The only thing that truly matters is winning. And if you're not doing that in a market like New York, then you don't hold any importance, you don't hold any significance, you're, to put things simply, you're sort of just useless almost, Yeah, I mean, the Mets are truly a mess. In terms of New York, they are right up there with the Brooklyn Nets. Right now, it's one of the worst franchises in all of New York. You can make a case: the top 3 worst organizations in professional sports in New York: the Mets, the Nets, and the Jets. Well, you have the Giants, the Knicks, who look at least decent, But I mean, like I said, they have the team. They can turn it around. I don't think they turn it around this season. But I mean, like I said, they got pieces. Their pitch rotation has to improve just a tad bit. Like I said, you got Soto, you got Lindor, who's actually hurt right now with, I believe, a foot or ankle injury. So, but you also have Bichette, who, if you're thinking long term, he's absolutely a young piece that you can build around for the future, because Lindor doesn't have much longer. Soto, I think, has a lot left in the tank, but you never really know. I mean, baseball is one of those sports where you can genuinely play till you're 45. The thing that Braun does in the NBA, I think we see a lot more commonly in baseball. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, though. I have to get to editing this, and because I think my goal is for Monday to be a single upload, Wednesday to be a double upload, to set up episode 75 coming out hopefully on Friday. For special reasons that I'm not going to leak until made official. So we'll see how it goes, because my uploading process and just the dynamic in general changes when I come home. So not because I want it to be that way. That's just how things are. So anyways, though, that's all I got. Y'all let me know what y'all think. If there are any Mets fans that come across this, or just New Yorkers who are somewhat in tune and like sports, let me know what your thoughts are on the Mets and how their season is going. Because I mean, I'm loving it, because I'm a Yankees fan, so I don't want the Mets to succeed in any way. Especially now that they have Soto, and he left us for a crosstown rival. They're not gonna say I'm praying on their downfall, but I'm not gonna sit here and act their downfall is not very amusing and entertaining to me, because it is. So yeah, I'm gonna get out of here, though. I appreciate y'all for watching always. Always remember, don't underestimate, appreciate. Go.